Okay, good morning and welcome to IGE Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Korea is at a crossroads, confronting challenges on various fronts. At the moment, we face a resurgence of a fourth wave of coronavirus infections, compounded by the slow pace of vaccination, undermining our socio-economic recovery efforts. But perhaps most serious issue facing us now is how to navigate the uncharted waters of escalating US-China tensions. In this context, it is indeed high time for Korea to set the right priority in the changing geopolitical dynamics. Today, we are very fortunate to have a distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Victor Cha, a leading authority on US foreign policy, especially on Asia. He will be joining us live from Washington, D.C. to discuss the timely issue of US foreign policy in the Biden administration, especially in the context of US-China relations and the challenge they pose for the regional stability. We will also discuss the implications of changing US policy for key allies, including, of course, South Korea. Dr. Cha is currently a professor and vice dean at Georgetown University. He is also senior vice president and Korea chair at CSIS, that is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Dr. Cha is former director for Asian Affairs in the White House National Security Council and has served as President George W. Bush's top advisor on North Korean affairs. He holds a PhD in political science from Columbia University. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Victor Cha, who will speak first for about 20 minutes, followed by discussion and Q&A as scheduled. Thank you, Victor, to be with us at this very late hour in Washington. Thank you very much. Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. John, for that kind introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate in the IGE Forum. It's a real honor to be here with you this evening. And I'm especially pleased to be on a panel with you as the moderator. I've watched your career with great admiration and all that you've done for the country of South Korea, both in the public sector and in your service in various capacities. So it's really a pleasure to be with you here, I guess this morning, here in Seoul, this evening here in DC. And also very happy to share the platform with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Chung Jae-ho from Seoul National University, as well as others I see on the screen, other familiar faces, and as, of course, Chairman Song Ki-hak, who is also a very good friend and respected colleague. So I'm very happy to be with you here today. What I thought I'd do is start my remarks by talking a little bit about the relationship between the United States and South Korea, and use that as a way to move into a discussion of China, US-China relations and its implications for Korea. And I'll speak for about 15 or 20 minutes or so, because I know that our distinguished discussant has equally, if not more important things to say on this topic than I do. But I'll start by saying that I think overall the Biden administration has come in, they've been very active in terms of their foreign policy on Asia. They have a very strong team in place, both at the White House and at the State Department. And it hasn't even been 100 days yet for the administration. And we've already seen a 2+2, where the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State have been to Seoul and to Tokyo. We've seen the quadrilateral summit by Zoom with the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. The national security advisors of South Korea and Japan were in Washington last week. And then Prime Minister Suga will be hosted by President Biden as the first White House state guest this week, Friday. So that for any of you who've worked in government, that pace of activity, that tempo of activity so early on in the administration really signals the seriousness with which they are approaching Asia and trying to rebuild the alliance relationship. While the focus this week in Washington will be on Japan, in short order, it will also be on Korea. And here I think the perspective that is shared by many in Washington, I think including the Biden administration, is that the US-ROK alliance can and should perform better than it's performing over the past 4 years. The alliance has faced some new headwinds in recent years that have been generated by shifting geopolitical dynamics. I think President Biden has to contend with the damage that has been done by the previous administration's America First agenda in the region, which included actions such as openly considering the withdrawal of US troops from the Korean Peninsula, suspending joint military exercises, and even at one point early on in the administration contemplating military actions. The alliance also has to contend with the most important geostrategic shift that is taking place in international relations today, and that is, of course, the rise of China and the tension that is placing on the US-Korea relationship. So all of these shifting geopolitical dynamics has candidly, I would say, eroded trust in the US-ROK relationship, and revitalizing this alliance is critical and urgent to addressing things like the rise of China, the challenges of North Korea, and desire to build more coalitional approach to supporting the rules-based international order. So let me talk first about several ways that I think it's important to revitalize the alliance relationship, and that will then lead us into a discussion of China and the US-RK relationship. First, I think it's very important in both capitals, in both governments, to reaffirm to their domestic audience the mutual interest in a strong alliance relationship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. For all of us who are alliance managers, this is second nature. We know these alliances are good for Americans and for Koreans. But we have just been through a period over the last 4 years where the United States, frankly, was speaking a language that our allies did not understand. The United States, as I said, had become about America first, a very transactional view about alliances, not seeing them in a positive light at all, seeing them largely as a waste of money, free riding, and trade competitors. So it was very much a language that allies like South Korea didn't understand. And it caused some damage in the relationship. So I think it's important to reaffirm in both capitals and in the publics the importance of this relationship for the two countries. Polling that we have done at CSIS and polling that I've seen as well done of the polling we've seen of Koreans at CSIS and polling that's been done of Americans about Korea, so that in general, both publics still have a very positive view of the relationship. And most importantly, in any sort of security contingency, both feel it's important to support each other. I mean, there are vast majorities in both countries that see it important as for the United States and South Korea to come to each other's assistance in any sort of military conflict. Second, it's going to be very important to clear the tactical underbrush in the relationship and to focus on the broader challenges ahead. The way I've described this in the past has been that the U.S.-Korea alliance over the last 4 years was it was sort of like a pyramid standing on its head, in the sense that the pointy tip of the pyramid had become the base of the relationship. The pointy tip referring to a couple of issues that completely subsumed the alliance relationship. One of these issues is well known to many Koreans, and that was the cost sharing issue, the special measures agreement, determining how much the South Korean government should pay for the non-personnel cost of stationing US forces in Korea, where President Trump wanted 5 times or more than 5 times what South Korea had paid in the previous agreement for this cost-sharing arrangement. This single unresolved issue essentially occupied all of the alliance's time over the past 4 years. And then the second issue being North Korea, right? And so in this sense, the alliance was focused on these very, significant but narrow issues when there is a much broader base to the alliance relationship, having to do with a whole variety of issues, going far beyond simply how much should be paid for US forces in Korea. So in that sense, the foundation of the relationship was not the base of the triangle. The foundation of the relationship had disappeared, and the triangle was teetering on simply one issue. And so it's very important to right-size that triangle and to clear the tactical underbrush. We saw a very important symbolic and I think intended first step in this regard when Secretary Blinken went to Korea and signed the SMA agreement to show that this issue was no longer going to be the issue that preoccupied everybody's attention. And there are other issues along those lines, but that's sort of the second thing, to sort of clear that tactical underbrush. Third is to restore the strength of US extended deterrence. The North Korean nuclear problem has grown outsized in terms of its proportion. And at the same time, in the last administration, we had a US president that was saying it's okay for North Korea to perfect their short-range ballistic missiles through testing, because the US president doesn't really care about that and cares only about the long-range ballistic missiles. In alliance theory, this is known as decoupling, where the ally decouples its own security from that of its allies. When you say, I only care about the long-range missiles that can hit the US, I don't care about the short-range missiles that could hit my ally. And so, it's not surprising to me that because of this sort of decoupling and the continued growth of North Korea's nuclear program, that there's more talk about possibly introducing nuclear weapons in South Korea. It used to be a fringe view. You hear it more and more now. And so I think the third important aspect is to strengthen deterrence again in this relationship with regard to US security commitments to South Korea, and increasing the ability of the two countries to work together, whether it's on defensive capabilities like missile defense or even offensive strike capabilities, to build an alliance or retool an alliance to deal with nuclear missile deterrence in a much more robust fashion. Fourth is to broaden the aperture of the alliance and expand zones of cooperation. The US-ROK alliance is a military security alliance, but it is also an alliance that provides non-security benefits to both countries, whether you're talking about trade benefits, climate change benefits, technology benefits. And it's also an alliance that provides public goods to the international community. In other words, it's not just an alliance that provides private goods to each of the parties to the treaty, but the alliance and what it does provides public goods to the international community. And so there are many areas of cooperation here, the so-called, wide foundational base to the pyramid, if you will, whether you're talking about cyber security, public health, climate change, energy, the environment, cooperation in outer space, what Ambassador Mark Lippert used to refer to as the New Frontiers agenda for the alliance relationship. There's a great deal of potential here, and some, it was potential that was squandered over the past 4 years. Fifth is to work together to promote the norms and values of the alliance. South Korea and the United States are two of the most successful liberal democracies in the world today. Operationalizing common values as a core foundation of the alliance is important, both for each country, as well as for supporting the rules-based international order and groupings such as the Democracy 10, right? The Biden administration is talking about hosting a summit of the major democracies of Asia. I'm sorry, of the world. And so this takes us to the sixth point with regard to China. And here, what I'd like, let's see if I can do this correctly, is I'd like to show you a chart that we have developed. So this is the chart we've created at CSIS. And as you can see, these are the major democracies: the United States, India, South Korea, Japan, and Australia. And each of these colored lines represents one of these initiatives that are being taken that are by the prominent democracies and that are about supporting the rules-based international order, and that have something to do with a challenge by China to the rules-based international order. So if you see in the key down here, you have things like the Blue Dot Network, which is about transparency with regard to development projects, the Clean Network, which is about next generation wireless, CPTPP, which is the multilateral free trade agreement, the Democracies 10, which I spoke about a minute ago, the Economic Prosperity Network, FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, the Quad, Trilateral Agreement on Development Finance, and Trilateral Strategic Dialogue. And the solid lines mean countries that are participating as members, and the dotted lines means that they're not participating as members yet. They may be in conversation with the countries about membership, but it's not something that has come to fruition. And so what the point of this is to show there is a rainbow of lines connecting the United States, Australia, Japan. There is growing connections with India. There are strong connections between the United States and Japan. But what I want you to look at is South Korea. And what you see here is South Korea is there are no solid lines connecting South Korea with any of the major democracies in Asia with regard to any of these initiatives, right? And this is a very concerning thing, right? This shows that there is, whether intended or not, an isolation that is growing with regard to South Korea and these coalitional groupings that are the priorities of the major democracies in Asia at the start of the Biden administration. So so the question is why, right? And I think one of the reasons is it's about China, right? In many ways, South Korea's decision not to join not all, but a lot of the groupings in one way or another is related to concerns about China. China is the most significant and yet inadequately addressed challenge to the long-term resiliency of the alliance. How to respond to China's growing assertiveness in the region. And so the alliance has to devise a new framework that acknowledges both South Korea's economic and North Korea-related equities in its ties with Beijing, but also understands that China is a large and sometimes bullying neighbor. So one of the things that we have talked about is to try to replace the idea that the US-ROK alliance is somehow an anti-China alliance with a principles-based framework for working together, the US and RK working together to shape a resilient Asia in areas such as secure supply chains, clean networks, robust democracy, freedom of navigation, development assistance, human rights. This is extremely important. The current strategy or efforts by South Korea to hedge between the United States and China is not a viable long-term strategy, particularly when the geostrategic context has become one that is much more competitive between the United States and China. In days when there was not as much competition between the United States and China, there was a lot more hedge space for Korea. But in the current environment, there's going to be less and less. It doesn't mean that there won't be any, but there'll be less and less. And so hedging in that sense is not a long-term strategy for Korea between the United States and China, because it neither helps the alliance, it doesn't help the relationship with China, and it doesn't help South Korea. And so it means some difficult choices have to be made down the road. But these are things that need to be talked about in the open between the United States, China, and South Korea. And obviously, Dr. John recognizes this, and this is one of the reasons why he's holding meetings such as this. I've gone on for quite a bit of time, but let me just say to finish on North Korea. So the Biden administration is now in the midst of its policy review with regard to North Korea. A policy review will take should be coming to its conclusion soon. It entails going through the negotiating record, interviewing people who were involved in the previous administration's negotiations, getting a sense, as Secretary Blinken has done, by going out to the region and meeting with allies, and then putting together a policy document. I'm not going to speak to what this policy review might produce. I think this is something that that none of us right now have access to. But I will say that the previous administration has left the Biden administration with a much more difficult problem than it had when it inherited the policy 4 years ago. And I say this largely because there has been no progress. While there have been many meetings and even very high-level meetings, there's been no progress in terms of denuclearization of North Korea. And at the same time, the programs, the nuclear weapons programs, the fissile material production programs, the missile programs have grown significantly over the past 4 years. So this is a very challenging environment for the new administration to try to make policy. And it has to try to craft a policy with a government in South Korea, current government in South Korea, that is very focused on engagement with North Korea. And at the same time, a relationship with China today that is very different from what it was, for example, when I was doing the negotiations in the six-party talks. The U.S.-China relationship is very different today than it was then. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to this. It's North Korea is famously called the land of lousy options, in the sense that there is no good policy. There is only bad policies and worse policies, and you have to choose between what is bad and what is worse. So I'm of course happy to talk more about that, but Dr. John, I feel like I've already gone beyond my time limit. So thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to the comments and the discussion.
Thank you for your brilliant and thought-provoking opening speech. Now let's proceed with discussion on some topical issues. Before we open for Q&A session, I would first like to invite our designated discussant, Dr. Chung Jae-ho, professor of Seoul National University, director of a program on U.S.-China relations at Seoul National University, for his comments and questions. Thank you, Professor Chung, to be with us today.
Thank you. I realize that there are 3 questioners after me, so I'll be very brief. I'll just pose a couple of questions. First question, the Biden administration just announced a decision to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan, and they will reinforce U.S. forces in Germany. So there might be some restructuring down the road. In your view, Victor, how would you prioritize? Your view, I'm asking your view, not the administration's view, but how do you prioritize, or how would you assess the order of expected risk among the 4 flashpoints in East Asia: Korea, Taiwan, South China Sea, and East China Sea? That's my first question. Second question is about the concept of resilient Asia in your talking point. If the main purpose is not against China, what is it exactly, the purpose of resilient China? How would you define that concept? That is my second question. Third one, we have talked about this before, but what do you think the US can actually do to help allies in the face of economic sanctions and retaliations? You actually characterize China as a bullying neighbor in your talking point, but it's not just a neighbor. You know, given what China has been doing to Australia, actually China is doing to neighbors and, you know, elsewhere. So what can the US actually do to help its allies in the face of economic sanctions? Fourth, my research suggests that there is a widening gap between public opinions in Korea about China, which has been, you know, getting really worse in recent years. But Korean government's policy toward China remains more or less the same. Some people even dub it as a pro-China policy. But in the US, public opinions about China has been getting worse, but its public opinions has been very closely aligned with the government policy. The gap is really getting smaller. So down the road, how would you assess the inside the Beltway assessment of Korea's relations with China? In other words, do you think mainstream view inside the Beltway is really focusing on Korea in China's orbit, or is it more of a result of democratic pendulum? In other words, different parties come into government, Korea's policy toward China will also change. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor?
I want to thank Dr. Chung for being with us today, and I always enjoy having a conversation with him. I respect his work so much. So let me try to answer these fairly quickly. The first on the flashpoint: Korea, Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea. What will be the priority? It's hard to say that there is a single priority. You know, they could come in with a ranking, and that could change depending on what happens in each of these places. They could come in saying that Taiwan's the #1 priority, and then North Korea tests an ICBM, and it could change things dramatically. I would say that you know, among these, the one that I think is probably quite concerning, at least at the moment, is Taiwan, because of the concerns about a trend in Chinese behavior, as we've seen in Hong Kong and Xinjiang, and particular the recent actions on Taiwan. And I think but I wouldn't say it's a priority as it related to the movement of forces, because you contextualize this in terms of forces. I think where we might see the real question is on the whole question of whether the United States should maintain a policy of strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity, right? This is the big debate inside Washington that, was opened by people like Richard Haas and others. Second, on a resilient Asia. So, I think the concept of resilient Asia is so I think that this administration has the potential to really be transformational in terms of its Asia policy, in the sense of doing things like this national security review on supply chains, right? We all know that supply chains are too vulnerable now as a result of the COVID pandemic and too dependent on China, right? And so if the idea of a resilient Asia is sort of a moniker for this notion, can there be a transformation in not just the way we do diplomacy, but the way we do business? And it may mean higher production costs, but it means a more resilient supply chain or a more resilient way of life. This doesn't necessarily have to mean a Cold War with China, but it just means that countries that want to be a part of this resilient Asia will not have to worry about disruptions or bullying or things of that nature as the ways in which they are rendered vulnerable today, whether it's because of COVID or because of unilateral non-conforming WTO actions by one particular country, which takes us to the third point. And that is that I don't think there is a single answer to how to deal with China's economic coercion. But we do know a couple of things. We do know, one, that China will continue with this coercion. Two, that no country can stand against this alone. It's just impossible. And that three, we're better standing together as a group than we are standing alone. And so that will not solve China's economic coercion, but it is a step better than where countries have been, like Korea and Norway and Philippines and others, have been isolated on their own and coerced by China. Even if these countries come together, obviously they cannot necessarily replace Chinese market share, but simply the action of coming together is important, and it could itself be a deterrent to Chinese action. And then finally, on your fourth point, public opinion in South Korea and the government's policy on China, I agree with you entirely. I just finished a paper for a volume at Stanford where this was one of the points that I was making, was that similar to yours, is that there is an increasing gap in South Korea on China policy, while there's a narrowing, particularly the gap is narrowed, particularly among the free trade Republicans and the business community in the United States on China, to becoming much tougher on China. And I think in terms of the inside the Beltway view, the chart that I put up, the graphic that I put up, when I show that around town in Washington, everybody wants a copy of it because it really encapsulates the concern. It's not that Korea is lost, but it is heading down a bad path. I mean, compared to the others, and it's not just Korea's fault. It's because it's obvious that the United States and Korea need to have more serious, candid conversations about how to manage this. And so I don't think the view is that Korea has fallen into China's orbit, but I think there is concern that there is a recognizable trend now, particularly as the Biden administration is trying to organize this coalitional diplomacy among democracies, and are moving forward, as I stated at the outset, moving forward pretty rapidly and very proactively. And Korea is sort of sitting in stasis right now, as we can see from that chart. So I think there is worry and anxiety there.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that's Vic's response to Professor Zhang's questions. All questions all together. Thank you, Professor Zhang, for your very insightful questions raised with Victor. I would like to move on. Next, we have a very special guest who will participate in our Q&A session today. I'm so very happy and honored to have Chairman Song Gi-hak, founder, chairman, and CEO of the Youngwon Group. Chairman Song is one of the most respected business leaders in Korea and abroad, as well as known for his generous philanthropic efforts. He serves as a member of the International Advisory Council at Brookings Institution, and also as a board director of IGE, our institute as well. Let's welcome Chairman Song Gi-hak, who is joining us live while on business trip to Bangladesh. He's joining us from Bangladesh. I hope we don't encounter any technical problems this morning. Thank you very much, Chairman Song.
Well, good evening, Dr. Chun, Dr. Victor Cha. It's so nice to see you this time because I'm more or less spending a month, in Bangladesh, pushing forward for the development of industrial park I'm doing last 20 years. So I'm so happy to see you. Also, at this time, I want to say hello for me to John as well as Michael, all your folks there. Also, I thoroughly enjoyed your discussions and then your speeches here. But I'm more puzzled that we have so many tasks to do. There are so many things to do, and we have so little time. And also, your administration must be very busy formulating good formulas for your Asia strategy amongst all these things. So rather than a question that, I like to support the idea of US doing more grassroots level campaign or marketing promotion of US and Korea relationship so that there are more popular support here. And also another thing is more human rights-based promotions that be it Korea, North Korea, or many other countries that this concept is being compromised one way or the other. So this also should be more focused as your administration always tells us that we are human rights based. This is really an opportune time that we look at it again. So another thing is actually Chinese coercive, wielding of power is so powerful. It is, as you rightly said, it is very difficult to withstand it alone. How we can be helping each other so that any losses, expected can be a little bit, lightened there. These are my, thoughts, and I want to thank you again that you really give us good, good lectures this morning or this evening for you. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you stay safe and healthy in Bangladesh in this difficult time there as well. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Chairman. So let me just say that. It's good to see you, Chairman. This is the wonders of the Zoom world in which we now live, that we can all converse in Seoul, in DC, and in Bangladesh all at the same time. You look well despite traveling and being in such faraway places. So I'm very happy to see that. It's very good to see you. On the 3 points you made, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the Trump administration really said nothing about human rights because President Trump really didn't care. But the Biden administration, I think you've already seen, has been quite vocal about its views on human rights. I think it is going to be more vocal on North Korea and human rights as well. I mean, the first and most important thing is to appoint a special envoy. As you know, Bob King was our envoy for 8 years during the Obama administration. He's with us now at CSIS. But the Trump administration never had a special envoy, and they allowed the issue of North Korean human rights to fall off the UN Security Council agenda. So I think there's going to be a concerted effort to change that. On grassroots support for the alliance, again, I can't agree with you more. This was, you know, one of the first points that I made, is that we need to reaffirm and continue to educate our two publics about the importance of the relationship. And here, I think, in particular, some of these items, when we talk about the new frontiers in the relationship, whether it's climate change or robotics or AI or the fourth industrial revolution, all these things, they're all cool areas to work in, but they also have a very important function for the alliance, which is bringing new constituencies into the alliance relationship, and then younger generations, right? Younger generations of entrepreneurs and others into the relationship. And then finally on China, I think that what you say is what is really the principle behind what the administration is trying to do, which is it's really China is so economically large, it's very difficult to completely buffer what China, the sort of economic damage that China can do to other countries. But we can still, as a group, try to do something to help Australia or South Korea or others. And that effort alone will be very important in allowing countries to feel like they can stand up against Chinese coercion. Even though it'll be painful, there will still be, they won't be alone, right? That's the most important thing. So, and again, it's good to see you, Chairman, and it's nice to be able to talk to you again. And hopefully we'll see you in DC soon. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing you all. Yeah.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, next we have another special guest for Q&A session this morning. Ms. Cho Sun-young is chair of Kwangwon University and its affiliated schools under Kwangwon Foundation. Chair Cho is considered as a truly rising figure to lead the group of private schools here in Korea. She holds graduate degrees in economics and management from Carnegie Mellon University and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Let's welcome Chair Cho.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm very honored to participate in today's webinar. Thank you, Dr. John, for inviting me. Dr. Cha, you mentioned the importance of military alliance between the US, ROK goes beyond the security ally. In that term, the tech war between the US and China is a hot issue to many tech businesses in many countries. Us, Kwangwon too, since our foundation having a legacy in engineering programs and many of our alumni in semiconductor industry, Biden is now looking to provide $50 billion in funding for semiconductor production and research aimed at addressing a global shortage and matching Chinese investment into the supply chain. This puts us, Korea, in a huge headache, dilemma of how to cater to China being our largest trade partner while keeping the US, our security ally and the country holding the patents for manufacturing semiconductor, happy. The multilateral grouping map you showed us, the reason for all the dotted line going out of the ROK, I mean, I think it's not easy for Korea to make prompt decision, you know, although very necessary at this point for the sake of Korea. For instance, on Tuesday, Huawei Korea held a press conference in Seoul, and the CEO expressed hope that Huawei could work more closely with Korean companies to overcome US sanctions, pointing out that Huawei had been a big partner to chip makers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. But even if Korean companies wanted to work more closely with China, there would be challenges due to US restrictions on its technology. So for Biden administration, what are the policy implications of the digital war on global governance and capital markets?
Thank you. Thank you, Jerome Cho, for the question. It's a very good question, and my sense is that you probably have a better answer to this question than I do, because you're clearly very well versed in this area. So what I would say is, I think you're right that you know, the Biden administration, as it pursues this policy, you know, there will be restrictions. Right? I think there will be restrictions which will make it harder for Korea to hedge between the two sides. And here I would say, I mean, it's something I think certainly both private sector and at the official level that Korea can raise with the United States. You know, just as it has done in the past on sanctions on Iran, you know, and seeking carve-outs with regard to energy imports from Iran. I mean, this is something that South Korea sought exceptions for and things. So I think that's certainly one route. But the other is to not hope that the United States can solve the problem for Korea, but for Korea to make the policy choices that it needs to make on these difficult issues. Right. I mean, as you said, I think you observed right quite astutely that the reason in that graphic that I showed that there are all those dotted lines from Korea is because they haven't made decisions yet. Right. They haven't made decisions. And, you know, I think some of these answers will come from the United States, but some of them require, you know, Korea, and maybe it's not just the internal government, it's a national discussion about this, as Jung Jae-ho said, you know, South Korean opinion is in a different place from where the government appears to be right now. So this is, I think, a national discussion inside the country about the choices they have to make, and they're not easy. I mean, there's no denying that these are not going to be easy choices, and there will be pain, unfortunately, because, you know, I don't think the U.S. will retaliate against South Korea, but China will, right? China will retaliate against South Korea. So, but it's a very important question. It's a very important issue, and I hope that you will be contributing and participating in that national debate in South Korea.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Cho, for joining us this morning. That you raised a very important question. It's a tough question to answer easily, but certainly, as Dr. Cha suggested, we need to go through forging national consensus on this very issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we have Professor Lee Frederick Easley of Ewha Women's University's Graduate School of International Studies. He has a special interest on North Korean issues, as I understand. Professor Easley holds his PhD from Harvard University. Let's welcome Professor Easley.
Thank you so much, and excellent discussion all. I'd like to raise the issue of so-called lawfare against North Korea. The video is not coming through.
But we can hear you. Okay.
Great. You know, I wanted to raise the issue of lawfare because Professor Cha has been following this so closely. And for those who maybe haven't been watching as closely, You know, the US Department of Justice has indicted North Korean cyber hackers. It's realized the seizure and civil forfeiture of one of North Korea's main smuggling vessels, the Wise Honest. And it secured recently the extradition from Malaysia of North Korean citizen Mun Cho-myung for money laundering. So my question for Professor Cha is whether and how future law enforcement actions by the Justice and Treasury Departments may be coordinated with the Biden administration's North Korea diplomacy as this policy review is wrapped up. And also whether you think the US will go after more Chinese entities, such as banks, to enforce sanctions on North Korea, or is that considered too risky an escalation with Beijing?
Thanks,
Thank
Leif.
you for the question, Dr. Cha.
Thanks, Leif, for the question. Again, these are areas, I mean, this is credit to Dr. Chun because he's brought questioners who can answer these questions better than the speaker can answer them. But I think, Leif, on your first question on law enforcement, you know, I think the role of the policy people when it comes to law enforcement is limited. I think in one sense, there is a policy decision to pursue vigorously these law enforcement actions, including seeking extradition, right, of those in other countries. But once that particular direction is authorized, then law enforcement just operates on its own, right, and goes forward with actions. And the only time it interconnects with policy would be at the point at which, you know, they're going to unseal an indictment or other sorts of things. And theoretically or conceivably, at that point, it could intersect with policy again, like, is this a good time to unseal the indictment or things of that nature? So I think they kind of start out together and then they go on separate tracks. And then, you know, when you get to a point where a case needs to be made public or there's an extradition, then they come together. They come together again. I think what you know, the indictment that was unsealed with regard to cyber is important because I think we will see much more North Korean cyber activity as a result of the sealing of the border because of COVID. And that North Korea's foreign currency reserves, according to experts, has depleted rapidly, and that cyber activity is really the only way that they can't even smuggle now because they're worried about COVID transmission. And so we're going to see much more cyber activity by North Korea, and I assume law enforcement has been following that. And then your second point was can you remind me again, Leif?
Whether you think that the United States will go after Chinese banks and whether that's a serious escalation with Beijing.
Yeah, so yes, it would be a serious escalation against Beijing. It has already been stated as part of the policy through the past 3 administrations that so-called secondary sanctioning is not off. It is on the radar screen. It's something that can be done. Even when Donald Trump talked about all these sanctions he could have put on North Korea but didn't put on North Korea, presumably some of those were not just sanctioning North Koreans, but sanctioning parties that were either knowingly or even not knowingly facilitating North Korean violation of UN Security Council resolutions or US law. So I think it's certainly possible that the United States could do this. There is a view on the policy side that these things are inversely correlated. The more you secondary sanction China, the harder it will be to gain their cooperation. But there are others who believe that that the Chinese government actually doesn't want Chinese banks and Chinese financial institutions to be in violation of UN sanctions or US law. And so for that reason, they would not react in a retaliatory fashion and would actually want these institutions to stop doing those sorts of things, because the financial reputation of these institutions is much more important important than any cash or particular gain that could come from North Korean illicit activities. Also, the targets of these targets in terms of secondary sanctions are most likely not going to be major Chinese. They're not going to be like the Bank of China or major institutions. They're going to be smaller, more rurally based and secondary institutions, which would not for China be worth creating a ruckus over with the United States when these institutions are clearly violating either UN sanctions or US law.
Okay, thank you for the response. Any feedback, Professor Easley, or are you happy with Dr. Charles?
Always very insightful, and I agree with everything that Professor Cha said. I'm so fascinated by the question of timing, because I recall the Banco Delta Asia case when it comes to legal enforcement and how it sometimes can interact with diplomacy in unexpected ways. And I think Professor Cha has already raised the point that when it comes to cooperation with China, the sanctioning of Chinese entities does not necessarily have an inverse relationship with political cooperation with Beijing on North Korea. So there's going to be a complex interaction going forward.
Thank you very much. We are right on time. But before we close, perhaps I may like to touch upon a couple of points. One, Victor, you outlined about 7 recommendations for the betterment of the Korea-US alliance. Well said. And the very first point you made was that we need to reaffirm to domestic audiences the mutual interest, the stronger alliance between the 2 countries. And now I'm happy to say that the precise reason, the purpose of having this sort of webinar is to serve that purpose. And with your brilliant participation today, I'm sure our audience, this good group of a large number of opinion leaders actually have been participating in this webinar, and they will be the main channel to spread out very objective, sensible views about the future of US-Korea alliance. So for that, I feel very happy with what we are having today. Second is a more interesting point, perhaps. As someone from finance and investment background, whenever someone talks about hedging strategy, I'm tempted to see it from slightly different angle. Now, hedging in finance and investment is intended to reduce risk. But we all know that if it's not used properly, it aggravates the problem. It enhances, it raises risk. That's exactly what happened on Wall Street a week or 2 ago. A huge problem, instability caused by hedge funds. So what I'm trying to say is that hedging strategy between US and China could be potentially very dangerous for the future of the country, because what is more important is to stick to the principle of managing, whether there is portfolio or the country, and set the priority right, rather than spreading your resources across different lines, and you think you're reducing the risk, but ultimately may worsen the situation. I think that could be an interesting implication from the observation and what's happening in the financial world.
I agree very much with that, Dr. Chun. I agree very much with that.
All right. Okay, we are now all set. It's time to close. Victor, thank you very much for your sharing exceptionally informative and insightful views with us today. Thank you very much on behalf of our audience. I would like to convey that message. And I also thank our viewers with us today as well. See you all next time. Thank you very much, Victor.
Thank you so much. Thank you.